Tilda's Promise is a new novel by author Jean P. Moore. It's a coming-of-age story, but not the usual one where an adolescent experiences a life-changing event and attains some understanding of his or her life or place in this world. The person coming of age is Tilda, a woman of a certain age who lives a comfortable life in Connecticut. She's always enjoyed the emotional support of family and friends, and especially of her husband Harold. But now she's widowed, and the world looks completely different. She slogs through the first few months of her new life, and we slog along with her and watch her evolve into a more confident person who learns she can assert herself and need not always subvert her needs to those of friends and family. She learns she need not fix everything either. What a revelation. My guest today is author Jean Moore. Stay with us and we'll tell you much more. I'm Alice Bloom. This is A Town and Village 2. Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us, Jean. I really enjoyed your book enormously. And I did wonder how you arrived at the subject of widowhood to focus your book. Mm-hmm. Do you have personal experience with that?
Not personal experience. I am fortunate in having a wonderful relationship with my husband of over 30 years. And knowing how much that relationship means to us, to both of us, I couldn't help but wonder, especially when I see my friends, many of whom are the same age or older, some of whom who have already gone through this experience. I couldn't help but wonder about what the rest of the journey has in store for all of us. And I thought that I wanted to explore a character who was faced with what to me would be a very difficult, if not insurmountable, problem. And I thought that it would be a way for me to express the empathy that I feel when I've been with my friends who've gone through this experience and have been a shoulder for them. And knowing that the best thing I can do is listen. But you can't help but try to put yourself in that position to really understand what someone's going through. And that culminated for me in the character of Tilda.
I'm beginning to feel that we're starting our journey into almost an epidemic of widowhood, as we're starting to see this happen to people older and then starting to happen to our contemporaries. Does Tilda have a normal reaction to widowhood? At first she withdraws.
Yes.
Rather than seeking the solace of friends or family, she basically wants to be alone. Is that a normal step?
Well, one of the things that I've discovered in being with various book groups and talking about the experience with a number of people is that there's no one way of describing the experience, that everybody is different. Some people recognize the need for social comfort almost immediately. Others, like Tilda, kind of withdraw into their shell and may take some prompting to get them out of that and into life again.
But it's important that they do emerge.
When you consider what the alternative is, yes. I mean, one of the lessons that Tilda has to learn in the book is that grief does not mean that she has to separate herself from life, that these are two things that coexist. That my parents always used to say, life is for the living. And I always thought that was kind of harsh and maybe the product of their thinking from their own, difficult experiences growing up in their lives. But that is harsh unless we understand that death is part of life. And that in order to get through these most difficult and challenging times, we have to also recognize that our lives are gifts to us and we have to continue them. Or the alternative is not emerging from that cocoon that grief can put you in.
Yet Tilda is very lucky. We are hearing a lot about isolation and loneliness these days. With social media, people could have thousands of friends on Facebook, but that's not real. We know that. I mean, occasionally it's nice to keep up with friends who are far away and see the pictures of their grandkids and such. However, that's not real friendship for most of us. Tilda's lucky. She has a daughter nearby and a granddaughter and a few good friends.
Right.
But what about the people who don't have family nearby?
All the more difficult, really difficult, because that can result in isolation that is not self-imposed, that's imposed from the circumstances. And so, you know, you would hope that there would be social organizations around that would help them to find some social compatibility somewhere. I think, you know, we're social animals. We are meant to be social. And unless you are, you know, really an incredible introvert, all studies and everything show that unless you have some kind of social connection, it's going to have an impact on your health and well-being.
Did you study psychology?
Only to the extent that most of us do in our college days or undergraduate days, but I have been fortunate enough to have access to psychologists and psychiatrists that I've been able to talk to in the writing of the book, and we've kind of touched on not just that issue, but on other issues as well.
Because you're very insightful. And I wonder what advice you have for friends of the bereaved. For example, in the book, Tilda has a good friend, Bev, who gives a little tough love too. I mean, she's a sounding board, she's there, but she finally says, come on, shake it, girl.
Right.
Let's go out, or let's go do something.
And how wonderful to have a friend that you are so comfortable with, that they know you inside and out, and there's nothing they can say or do that will insult you. There's nothing that you can say or do that will drive them away, even in your darkest hour. So I wanted Tilda to have that, and have that experience that would help her in her recovery. You know, again, that there's luck involved in this a lot of times, you know, to be fortunate enough to have friends like that.
To have an old friend. You did make the distinction between old friends and new friends, and yet we're all in a situation where we are making new friends, and it's important to make new friends as life goes forward. Sadly, we lose some old ones, and people become unavailable to us for other reasons. But you do make the comment that old friends are tolerant. You don't have, they understand you. You don't have to prove yourself, and they'll forestall, or they'll somehow manage to get through the difficult moments when you're being impossible.
Right, and they kind of laugh at one another and their foibles, which is also very, very comforting in times of need.
Now, Tilda also survives and emerges from her sadness by helping others. But she learns an important lesson. I mean, she's had a life, and I guess most women of a certain age are socialized to be the support people for those around them, always solving the problems.
Right.
I'll get that from the little thing, I'll get that at the grocery store, I'll make that food, I'll drive you, I'll take care of this. She helps her granddaughter, who's struggling very, very severely with the loss of her grandfather, who's a good friend, as well as being her grandfather. Now, how does Tilda gain the strength to be there for her granddaughter when she's hurting so badly herself?
Well, in the beginning, she takes great pride in that relationship that she has with her granddaughter, Tilly. And when her daughter Laura asks her to intervene on an issue that they're having, she does so very proudly, almost a sense of overweening pride. And she finds that her granddaughter isn't as glad to have all that help, and really gets upset with her and kind of casts her aside. And for Tilda, in her grief, this is a very difficult thing, because she's relying on her granddaughter for a lot of her own emotional support.
So here she's under the guise of helping the granddaughter, but in fact, that's palliative to her.
Yes, absolutely. So when she loses that, it does cause her to kind of spiral. She begins, you know, stalking her on Instagram and just wanting to, you know, stay in touch in some way, but she's pretty much been banished from Tilly's world for a little while.
Tilly's the granddaughter,
And Tilly's
who's her namesake, of course.
Yes.
Although she rejects that name.
Eventually
She does. We'll get back to Tilly, but there's some interesting observations about Laura, the daughter, and observations about parenting today, driving around in huge, oversized SUVs and such.
Right.
I guess one generation always struggles to understand the next. Do you think it's more prevalent now that the distinction between, we'll say, our generation raising children and the current one is greater, that gap is greater than has been before because of technology and because of materialism?
You know, I would be very reluctant to say that the generational divide is greater now than it's ever been. I can remember back in the 60s when I was a part of the generation that the older generation couldn't understand. So I very much wanted this to be an intergenerational story as well, to have Tilda, the grandmother and mother, in the middle of these two generations and see what her own challenges with them would be. She is having a very difficult time understanding Laura. Laura's a wonderful person, and she gives her credit. Tilda certainly gives her credit. But she has done something that Tilda's generation thought they were fighting for the rights of women not to have to stay at home and just be in the home. I think we've all learned, over the years that it's a matter of choice for those who are fortunate enough to have the option to make that choice. But she's having a hard time understanding Laura's decision to become a helicopter parent. And she even says that she's not a helicopter, she's a hovercraft. So, there is this distinction between them. They don't really quite understand each other, but there's a tremendous bond there as well.
Helicopter parents are ubiquitous in our society, but I thought that they relented once the child became an adolescent, because adolescents push you away. I mean, that's sort of the way it does work. In this case, Laura does push her mother away in a big way. Do you think that's payback for the hovering?
That Laura pushes her away?
Well, that Tilly pushes Laura away.
Oh.
Maybe I misspoke.
Yes, Tilly pushes Laura away. Tilly I think, is the product of helicopter parenting when the child feels so much pressure to meet the demands of the parent. And so when she feels that she may be going in a direction that her parents, especially her mother, might not understand, she's fearful. She's more fearful than anything.
So rather than the helicopter parent creating a bond that's very tight with the child, and even though they clearly love each other, I don't think that's in dispute, but instead of there being a good communication, in fact, when they hit a bump in the road, it becomes an obstacle that they can't confront.
I think in this case particularly, I can't speak for all parents who are, kind of very involved in their kids' lives. I mean, I've also seen many examples of children who are having a difficult time separating from their parents because their parents have made so many decisions for them and have really provided the roadmap to such a degree that they're having a difficult time breaking out on their own. So, but this was a situation where the child was feeling pressured, was feeling a lot of pressure to be the perfect daughter.
Okay, but there's more here, and you touch on a subject that actually has come up in my personal life a number of times, and that's gender confusion. We hear a lot about trans, and we're all trying to understand people's needs. We look for pronouns that are sensitive. I mean, we're all going through this together now. And I found myself in two situations where grandparents have said to me they're dealing with a child and a grandchild dealing with a trans situation. And they are struggling. They want to be supportive, but they're trying to understand and trying to do the right thing. This is a subject that you've brought to this book as well.
Yes, I have. And like you, I have seen a lot of examples of this. In my own life, I have a goddaughter who is now a flourishing transgender woman who I have observed through her adolescence, really grappling with this issue. Fortunately, she is the product of a very supportive family who stayed with her throughout her entire journey. And so she's a success story in that regard. We know that kids who are experiencing gender identity issues, whether they actually are truly transgender or through a state of not really knowing, that they really need that support desperately. The statistics are just incredibly disheartening and discouraging to see how many kids who don't have that kind of support just simply don't make it. The suicide rate among that population is also very high. We do see a number of examples of this today. When I have these book group discussions, almost invariably someone comes up to me either after the class or during the class and will bring out their own stories about how this has touched them in their lives. It really makes you wonder what was happening in the past. How many people were not able to live authentic lives because they didn't feel that they could ever confront this truth about themselves? So for me, the issue that I've seen firsthand and that I wanted to deal with was the importance of a person capturing and taking hold of their true identity and being able to do that. And I thought it also tied in with Tilda's own need to create herself for the rest of her life. So there's a bond between them coming at it from very different.
And it's interesting that the grandmother, a generation separated from the granddaughter, is able to step in and be supportive when the parents are struggling to understand and to try to do the right thing, but they're clearly confused themselves and hurting. It doesn't seem to be a roadmap.
No. I think it is, well, there are many avenues for support, but there's nothing that's going to take the place of confronting your own, emotions as you go through this as a family member, to know that you may feel conflicted about it, but that the important thing is the person whose identity is at stake. So yes, Tilda does become the supportive one, but she struggles with it herself, very definitely, and it takes her a long time to really get on board.
Now, her daughter Laura and her husband are also struggling with another emerging identity, and that is Laura's Jewish identity. Now, she's brought up without much heritage, I guess you would say, although Harold, Tilda's husband, Laura's father, was Jewish, but didn't really celebrate or participate in Jewish traditions. Why does Laura suddenly reach out and want to identify?
Well, I thought that was an interesting journey that she was on. She too had a very close relationship with her father. Her father was, I suppose, what you would call a secular Jew, a Jew of culture rather than fervor, than religious fervor. But he had a past and of stories in his family. And going back into Portugal and into the stories of conversos in Portugal who, again, were not able to have their true identity. And so that relationship for Laura was very important. And she came home one day when she was in high school and said that she wanted, no, it was actually in middle school, that she wanted to be a bat mitzvah.
That's right.
And so she claimed her Jewish identity very strongly, surprising everyone. And she was also a student at a Catholic school. And it turned out that the school was quite supportive of her in her journey.
Did they hold the first bat mitzvah in the Catholic school?
No, they didn't, but I'm sure they were invited.
Well, you touch upon the value of stories and storytelling and how important it is. It's such a challenge in families today to be able to have the time to tell stories with competing personalities and people coming together across great distances, and the competition from all the technology that we have. Everybody has a phone at hand, one or more.
Right.
That it's almost a marvel that a family exists where stories can be told in a coherent, declarative fashion. So that was certainly very important. There's another theme in the book that resonated with me, and that was secrets. Now, Tilda comes from a family where there was a big secret, and this is also a reflection of a generational change. She had a brother who was never talked about.
Right, yes. So another issue of hidden identity. This child, who was more than likely a Down syndrome child, it never really is described in the book, was in the day of Tilda's own parents not something that society could accept. Parents during that generation were told to institutionalize their children and to get on with their lives. That was the way it was dealt with, so they were hidden. And so Tilda discovers this information after her father's death. And it becomes a theme for her in the book, something else about her own identity that hasn't been captured. And while it isn't pursued in great depth in the book, it's there. It's one of the sub-themes for Tilda in capturing her own sense of who she is, what her stories are. And she, by the end of the book, when we've been through her journey with Tilly, she recognizes that Tilly is the one, she's the future, and Tilly, who is now Harper, will be able to absorb these stories and handle them into a future that is more tolerant and more inclusive. So that's part of the hope in this intergenerational story, is that we see the hope in the future and in the future generation.
And in addition to the hope, I think what you have is the expectation that Tilly would be a sounding board for this story and perhaps have a non-judgmental, objective response to it, because the guilt is so great for Tilda, even though the guilt, I mean, she had nothing to do or say about this. She did not make that decision.
Right.
But she still bears a tremendous burden.
The harm of the family history has been done, and she is harboring it. She and her sister both. Her sister harbors it more in a kind of denial, and Tilda harbors it in that she keeps it in. And so these are things that have to be dealt with for us to be truly free.
And how do you think Tilly will help her deal with that? It's not fully explored in the
No,
book.
I think it's more that she feels that by the end of the book, when Tilly has claimed her identity, that she will now have the strength going forward to be the authentic one in the family. And she helps Tilda to find her way at the end of the book. After she's worked through all of her own fears, she recognizes that Tilda is still operating out of fear and confronts her. So she's kind of staking a claim to the future and the kind of person that she's going to be.
A lot in the book. There's one more subject we just have to touch on, and that is sexual harassment, which you include. Now, I was surprised, and yet it was handled very deftly, but it did give an opportunity for Tilda to emerge as a more confident woman. Now, she's a woman of a certain age, so she's certainly had her moments, and she's had lots of opportunities to grow.
Right.
But she finds herself being hit on by the rabbi she confides in or seeks counsel from.
Right, right.
And that's not such an unusual situation. Now, it's not rape, it's not a violent assault, but it is abuse. What's her first reaction to it?
Well, it's interesting that you should bring this up, because when I wrote the book, this was before the Me Too movement. And I wanted a situation in which Tilda would have to confront some of her withdrawal and the fact that she wasn't so terribly assertive. And I put it into this situation to add some to add some complexity, because he's a good rabbi, actually. He gives her some he's a rabbi emeritus, but he gives her something to hold on to in her grief that she goes back to throughout the book.
So she's able to separate the good advice from the bad behavior.
Right. Now, the bad behavior is, I suppose it would depend a lot on your point of view. If you felt that you were being counseled by someone who then reached out and touched you on your knee, whether or not that was acceptable. Tilda definitely got the impression, and I think women know when things aren't quite what they should be, she got the impression that it was inappropriate. But she just stood up and said, well, you know, it's time to go, pretty much, did not confront him. So it's Bev, who is the, you know, old, tried and true hippie of the 60s, one of the first feminists of the second wave, who tells her, you know, you can't let this stand. You know, you're just going to dwell on this if you don't set it straight. So Tilda then does make the phone call and confronts him. He kind of wiggles around, but he does eventually give her the apology that she's looking for.
He does give her the apology, but I'll tell you what struck me as most authentic, as now that you're telling me you wrote this before the Me Too movement, there probably isn't a woman alive who hasn't been in a situation like this. Now, fortunately, she had the strength to simply pick herself up and get out, and she was able to.
Right.
He wasn't a sexual predator.
No, not in that sense.
Not in that sense, but he did cross a line. He made her uncomfortable when there was no need to do that.
Right.
Or there were lots of ways, if he truly wanted to comfort her, he could have done that with words.
Right,
Not inappropriate touching. So that was one of the things that I said, well, this is an authentic experience. But Tilda does emerge from, not only does she ask for his apology, when he is asked to officiate.
Laura was going to ask him to officiate for the unveiling.
For the unveiling, right.
That's correct. Because he had a relationship with Harold, the husband and father, Laura's father.
But I got the sense that prior to this episode and Tilda's journey through this first year of widowhood, she probably would have accepted his presence at the unveiling without protest.
But she had come through some changes.
Some changes, and it gave her the strength to say, this makes me uncomfortable.
Right.
We'll have to find someone else. So there's a lot of truth in this book, and it resonates very strongly with me, and I think it will with other readers.
Well,
I want to thank you for being my guest. And perhaps in the next book, we'll talk more about the privilege of getting older.
And it is a privilege, isn't it?
There are days. Yeah. I think for the most part, you're absolutely right. Jean, I wish you luck with the book. It's a wonderful read, and I commend it to our readers at home as well. Tilda's Promise. I'm Alice Bloom. This is A Town in Village 2. We'll see you next time.